Darnell Okafor was 38 years old the morning he buried his mother, and before the last hymn had finished echoing off the walls of Greater Zion Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee, his wife pressed a manila envelope into his hand with the quiet efficiency of someone who had chosen the moment deliberately. He did not open it in the church. He did not open it in the parking lot. He placed it on the passenger seat of his truck and drove his mother's oldest friend, Miss Etta, to the repast at his aunt's house on Beale Avenue, and he carried dishes and accepted condolences and refilled sweet tea and said thank you to people who said she was a good woman. Because she was, and none of that changed because of the envelope on the seat of his truck. His wife's name was Camille. She did not come to the repast. He opened the envelope at 11 o'clock that night, sitting alone in his mother's kitchen in the house on Beale Avenue where he had grown up, with the lights on low and a cup of coffee going cold beside him. Divorce petition. Filed 2 days prior. The filing date was not accidental. His mother, whose name was Harriet Louise Okafor, had died on a Tuesday. The petition had been filed on a Wednesday. The envelope had been delivered on a Thursday at a funeral during the final hymn. What Camille did not know, what her attorney, a man named Philip Rourke, who operated out of a glass front office in East Memphis and who had built a reputation on aggressive asset acquisition in high-asset divorces, did not know, was what Harriet Louise Okafor had spent the last 4 years doing quietly, in consultation with a trust attorney in Nashville, in preparation for a day she had known was coming long before her son had allowed himself to see it clearly. The will had not yet been read. That would happen Friday morning in a conference room downtown at 10 a.m. Philip Rourke would be there. He had arranged it specifically. He believed it would be useful. He was right. It just was not useful in the direction he expected. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Darnell had been a logistics coordinator for a regional freight company for 11 years, which meant he spent his professional life solving problems that other people created by not thinking far enough ahead. He mapped routes. He identified bottlenecks before they became failures. He read systems the way other people read faces, not for emotion, but for structural truth, for the place where the load exceeded the design. His supervisor had once told a room full of new hires that Darnell Okafor could walk into a warehouse he had never seen and in 20 minutes tell you exactly where it was going to break down. He had meant it as a compliment. Darnell had accepted it as a description. His mother had understood this about him before he understood it about himself. Harriet Louise Okafor had raised him alone in the house on Beale Avenue after his father died when Darnell was 11, and she had done it with the particular combination of warmth and precision that certain women carry without announcing it. The kind that produces sons who are quiet and capable and slow to trust and deeply loyal once they do. She had worked as a records administrator for a Memphis hospital for 27 years. She knew paperwork. She knew systems. She knew, as she would say, where things were filed and why it mattered. She had told him once, sitting at this same kitchen table with her hands folded in the way she folded them when she was saying something she wanted him to keep. Baby, the people who want something from you will always tell you with their patience. Watch how long a person is willing to wait. That's the size of what they're after. He had married Camille 6 years ago. She was a marketing director, polished and strategic, with a social fluency he had always admired and had, in the early years, mistaken for genuine interest in the people she moved through. She was beautiful in the way of a finished room. Every element deliberate, nothing accidental. He had loved her for what he believed was her depth, and had understood too late that some rooms that look deep are simply dark. His mother had been kind to Camille in the way of a woman who has decided that being unkind serves nothing. She had not, in 6 years, said a single negative word about her daughter-in-law to her son. She had not needed to. She had, instead, made 3 phone calls to an attorney in Nashville and taken 2 bus trips down and back over the course of 2 years, and she had done all of this without telling Darnell, because she knew her son, and she knew he would have told her it wasn't necessary. And she knew with the certainty of a woman who had raised him that it was. Camille had kissed his cheek at their wedding with a warmth that felt, in retrospect, like a closing handshake. She had been a good performer for 3 years. Then, she had been a distracted performer for 2. Then, she had stopped performing entirely and simply waited, with the patience his mother had warned him to watch for what she had decided she was owed. The first sign had been a real estate inquiry he found open on the shared laptop 14 months ago, a search for condominiums in Midtown, filtered by single occupancy listings with a saved comparison of 3 units, and a note to herself about financing options. He had closed the tab and said nothing, and watched more carefully from that point forward. 3 weeks later, a legal document had arrived at the house addressed to Camille, not to both of them, to her alone, in an envelope marked with the return address of a firm he did not recognize. She had retrieved it from the mailbox herself before he could see it. He had noted the name on the return address from across the driveway. He had looked it up that night. Philip Rourke, Family Law. He had filed that information in the place where logistics coordinators file information that is not yet actionable, but will be. He had not yet had time to act on it when his mother's health turned in November, and his attention contracted to what mattered most. He had no regrets about that. He had been where he was supposed to be. He found the second piece on a Sunday 2 months before his mother died, in a moment that had the quality of all the discovery moments in his life. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a small thing in the wrong place that a less observant man would have walked past. Camille had left her personal email open on the kitchen iPad. She had not done it carelessly. She had done it the way people do when they believe the other person in the house is too preoccupied with grief to look. He was not too preoccupied. He was, if anything, grief sharpened. He had learned from his mother that attention was a form of love, and he had spent months paying very close attention to what was in front of him. He stood at the kitchen counter and read what was on the screen without touching the device. The email was from Rourke's office. A billing summary. Itemized. Case initiated 11 months prior, 2 months before he had seen the real estate search on the laptop. The line items told the story in the flat language of legal billing, initial consultation, asset research, property valuation inquiry, financial disclosure preparation, filing preparation, and one line near the bottom of the itemization that he read twice to be certain he had read it correctly. Timing strategy consultation, client request, spousal bereavement window. His hands didn't shake. He took a photograph of the screen with his phone. He went to the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed with his hands on his knees and breathed once deliberately the way he breathed when a route had collapsed and he needed to reroute 12 trucks in under an hour. He identified the variables. He identified the constraints. He identified what he controlled and what he did not. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother's attorney in Nashville. The phone rang 4 times. He left a message that was 8 words. "This is Darnell. I think it's time." The attorney called back within the hour. Her name was Vivian Carr. She had been his mother's personal attorney for 9 years and the administrator of Harriet's estate planning for 4. She asked him 2 questions. He answered both. She said, "Your mother was very specific about what she wanted and when she wanted it to happen. I think you should know that she expected something like this. Not exactly this, but something like this. He asked her what that meant. She said, "It means she planned accordingly. Come to Nashville when you can." He drove to Nashville the following Saturday, while his mother was still alive and sleeping more than she was waking. And he sat in Vivian Carr's office for 2 hours and heard what his mother had built in the quiet years when no one was watching. He drove home with his hands steady on the wheel and his mind already rerouting. Vivian Carr was 55, precise, and had the quality of a woman who had heard every version of every story and had long since stopped being surprised by any of them. Her office had diplomas on one wall, and on the opposite wall a single-framed quotation his mother had apparently admired enough to mention, which Vivian had placed there in her honor. "What you build in the quiet is what stands in the storm." She laid out the estate documents in order. The house on Beale Avenue, Harriet's house. The house where Darnell had grown up had been held in a revocable living trust since 4 years prior. The trust was structured with Darnell as sole beneficiary and included a specific provision, drafted at Harriet's explicit instruction, that excluded trust assets from any marital estate claim in the event of a divorce proceeding initiated within 5 years of the trust's establishment. The provision cited Tennessee statute directly. Vivian had drafted it with a colleague who specialized in asset protection. It was clean, documented, and unassailable. The house had been appraised 14 months ago. Its value, in the current Memphis market, reflected both its location and the renovations Harriet had made over 30 years. The number was considerably larger than Camille or Rourke had any reason to suspect a house on Beale Avenue in that zip code would carry. There was also a second document, a separate account, a modest one, by some standards, substantial by others, that Harriet had maintained since Darnell was 22, and that had been structured, at its establishment, as a sole heir trust outside the probate estate. Vivian set the account summary on the desk and let Darnell read it without speaking. He read it twice. "She never said a word," he said, to no one in particular. "No," Vivian said. "She said it all in here." She also told him one thing his mother had said directly. In their final planning meeting, which Vivian had written down because she knew she would want to repeat it accurately, "My son is going to be hit with something when I go. I don't know exactly what shape it'll take. But I know the woman he married, and I know what she's been waiting for. I want Darnell to walk out of that will reading, knowing that I saw it coming, and I handled it. I want him to know I left him a foundation, not just a house." Darnell sat in the chair in Vivian's office for a long moment after she finished. Then he said, "Who else needs to be in that room on Friday?" Vivian almost smiled. "Whoever she invites," she said. He drove back to Memphis and went to his mother's house and sat in her kitchen and did not think about Camille. He thought about his mother at 40, at 50, at 63, doing her paperwork at this table after long shifts, knowing something she had chosen to handle instead of declare. He thought about the bus trips to Nashville. He thought about the 3 phone calls she had made before she made them useful. He thought about a woman who had watched a long time and had, with the patience of someone who understood exactly what she was watching, built accordingly. His cousin Jerome, who had driven up from Jackson for the funeral, came by that evening and sat with him on the porch. Jerome was a man of few words and had inherited from their shared family line the particular quality of sitting with someone in difficulty without making it worse by talking. They sat for a while. Then Jerome said, "You doing all right, Dee?" "I'm clear," Darnell said. Jerome nodded, which was enough. Inside, on the kitchen table, Darnell had opened his laptop and begun to build what he thought of, in his professional vocabulary, as the manifest, the complete documented record of what had been moved, what had been filed, what had been timed, and what was now on the record. He added the billing summary photograph. He added the real estate search. He added the timeline he had been building since the day he had looked up Philip Rourke's firm from his driveway. The total documented pre-filing period, 14 months of preparation. The timing strategy notation in the billing summary remained the most specific line item. He had forwarded it to Vivian the previous week. She had read it and replied with 3 words, "That'll be useful." He closed the laptop and went to bed in his mother's house for the first time in 20 years, in the room where he had grown up under the same ceiling and slept without difficulty. Start at the beginning, he thought, in the voice of his mother. Don't skip steps. The will reading was held at 10 a.m. in a conference room at Vivian Carr's Memphis satellite office, a spare room on the 4th floor of a building on Main Street, with 1 rectangular table and 8 chairs. Darnell arrived first, with Jerome. Vivian arrived and sat up at the head of the table. His mother's oldest friend, Miss Etta, arrived, because Harriet had left her a specific bequest, a cedar chest and a particular brooch, and had wanted her present. Camille arrived at 9:58 with Philip Rourke, which Darnell had expected, and which Vivian had accommodated, because there was no legal barrier to either of them being there, and because, as Vivian had told Darnell the day before, some things are better witnessed than described later. Rourke was a man in his early 50s who carried himself with the polished certainty of someone accustomed to entering rooms already knowing how they would end. He set a legal pad on the table in front of him and uncapped a pen and settled back in his chair with the posture of a man prepared to take notes on assets. Camille sat beside him in a black dress that was appropriate for a post-funeral proceeding, and kept her eyes slightly away from Darnell's, which was the posture of a person who has decided that composure is the same as power. Vivian read the will in its entirety, which took 11 minutes. Miss Etta received the cedar chest and the brooch. A small cash bequest went to Greater Zion Baptist Church. The remainder of the estate, the house on Beale Avenue, all personal property therein, and the financial instruments attached to the trust, went to Darnell Eugene Okafor, sole beneficiary, in accordance with the trust document established 4 years prior. Rourke had his pen ready. He noted the house. He noted the trust. Then Vivian set the trust document on the table, and he reached across and read the asset protection provision, and the statute citation, and the establishment date. And Darnell watched the pen in his hand stop moving. Rourke read the provision twice. His expression did not change, but something behind it did. The particular recalibration of a man who has just discovered that the room he walked into had a different floor plan than the one he had memorized. Vivian then set the account summary on the table. She did not pass it to Rourke. She placed it in front of Darnell, who read it and set it down, and did not look at Camille. Camille looked at Darnell. He met her eyes once, without heat, without accusation, with the same steady measurement he brought to a system that had revealed exactly where it was going to fail. Rourke leaned toward Camille and spoke in a low voice for approximately 45 seconds. Whatever he said, it did not improve her expression. Then, Vivian set the final document on the table. The billing summary photograph, the one Darnell had taken of the iPad screen, the one with the line item about spousal bereavement window, in a plastic sleeve, time-stamped, alongside a 1-paragraph legal notation from Vivian's office about its relevance to the filing timeline and the question of bad faith conduct in the initiation of divorce proceedings. Rourke looked at the document in the plastic sleeve for a long time. He set his pen down. He closed his legal pad. He did not look at Camille. He said to Vivian, in a voice that had lost its polish somewhere in the previous 3 minutes, "I'll need to review the trust provisions independently before my client responds." Vivian said, pleasantly. Of course, take all the time you need. Darnell's mother had once told him that the clearest signal a plan had worked was silence in the place where there had been noise. The room was very quiet. Darnell stood. He buttoned his jacket with the unhurried precision of a man who had measured twice and cut once and was satisfied with the result. He looked at the room, at Miss Etta, who gave him the small nod of a woman who had known his mother long enough to know exactly what had just happened. And then he looked at Camille one more time. She saw you coming, he said. It was not an accusation. It was a logistics report, a statement of fact about a system that had been mapped in advance. She built accordingly. He picked up his copy of the trust documents. He walked to the door. He paused without turning. My mother spent her whole life building things that were meant to last, he said. She knew the difference between someone who wanted to be part of what she built and someone who was just waiting to inherit it. He opened the door. She left me everything she wanted me to have. That was always the plan. He walked out. Jerome was in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his keys in his hand. He looked at Darnell's face and read it, the way he had always read it, quickly and accurately, and said nothing. He pushed off the wall and they walked to the elevator together in the silence of men who understood that some things did not require comment. Philip Rourke submitted his withdrawal from the case 14 days later. 10 months passed like a Memphis autumn, slowly, warmly, with the particular quality of a season that knows it has earned its ease. Darnell moved into the house on Beale Avenue. He had not planned to. He had planned to rent it, to hold it as an asset. But he walked through it in January and stood in the kitchen, where his mother had sat at the table, with her hands folded, and her coffee going cold, and he understood that this was where he was supposed to be for a while. He repainted the living room in the colors she had always said she wanted, but never gotten around to. A warm, deep green that made the room feel, in the morning light, like something that had been growing there for years. He started a mentorship program through his company, pairing junior logistics coordinators with senior staff, which was something he had been turning over for 3 years and had not had the bandwidth to begin. The program placed 8 people in its first 6 months. He named it after his mother's professional title, the Records Initiative, because she had believed and had told him once that the difference between a system that worked and one that didn't was almost always documentation. He met a woman named Diana at a fundraiser for Greater Zion in the spring, a nurse practitioner who had grown up 4 streets over from Beale Avenue and who had, at the fundraiser, said something precise and unsentimental about the neighborhood that made him want to hear what else she thought. She was direct without being harsh and laughed without performance. And she had, on their 3rd meeting, walked through his mother's kitchen and admired the table without knowing its significance, and then listened, without filling the silence, while he told her why it mattered. They moved slowly. It felt like the right pace for something built to last. The divorce was finalized in a proceeding that was considerably less useful to Camille's original intentions than she had planned for. The Beale Avenue property was excluded in full. The sole heir account was excluded in full. The marital estate division reflected what was legally shared and nothing that was not. And the bad faith filing notation had introduced a complexity that Rourke's replacement had advised Camille to stop fighting on specific grounds. She received what she was entitled to. It was not what she had waited 14 months to take. He heard through Jerome that she had relocated within the year, that Rourke's firm had quietly declined to list the case in their promotional materials, that the Midtown condominium had not been purchased. He heard it the way he received any logistics update. Noted, filed, moved past. On a Sunday morning in October, Darnell Okafor sat at his mother's kitchen table with coffee still hot in the green-walled room, with the morning coming through the east window the way it always had. On the table beside his mug was a framed photograph. His mother at 60, in the backyard of this house, in the garden she had kept for 20 years, holding tomatoes from the vine with the expression of a woman who had grown something and was not surprised by it, but was still, quietly, pleased. He had taken that photograph himself. It was the last summer she was well enough to work the garden. She had not known he was going to take it. She had just been standing there, in the late afternoon light, with the tomatoes in her hands, not performing anything for anyone. He looked at her for a long time. She had seen it coming. She had built accordingly. She had not told him because she had trusted him to be, when the time came, the man she raised him to be. He was free. He was grounded. He was, for the first time in years, exactly where he was supposed to be. What you build in the quiet, he thought, in her voice, is what stands in the storm. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.